Hello and welcome to another Maine Historical Society virtual program. It is February 22nd, 2023, and this is our book talk on Evangeline Reconsidered with Veni Harlan. Now, before we begin, I just want to take a moment to say that Maine Historical Society recognizes that what is currently referred to as Maine is Wabanaki homelands, a place that the Wabanaki people have stewarded for over 13,000 years. And wherever we are in Maine, we are on Wabanaki homelands. We recognize the inherent sovereignty of the Abenaki, Maliseet, Micmac, Passamaquoddy, and Penobscot nations within these lands and waters. Understanding Wabanaki history is vital to understanding Maine, and we are committed to helping provide education about this history through partnerships with Wabanaki people. Tonight's program is a book talk on Evangeline Reconsidered. I want to get my copy so you folks can see. With author Veni Harlan. Here it is. This beautiful book. And our guest speaker this evening, Veni, is a multidisciplinary creative who has worked as a graphic designer, photographer, art director, educator, writer, communications specialist, and environmental advocate. She completed an MFA in graphic design from Louisiana State University and a fellowship in environmental communication from Loyola University, New Orleans, and maintains an endless curiosity in regional history, culture, and the natural world. Veni, thank you so much for being here with us this evening.
Thank you, Kathleen, and thank you to the Maine Historical Society for hosting this webinar. I'm very honored to be.
Our pleasure. And folks, I'm going to put in the chat too, the book is available through Maine Historical Society, so I'll share that link with you guys if you want to buy your own copy. It really is a gorgeous book, and excited to hear more about it.
So, Kathleen, if you want to hold that cover up.
That's right, yep.
I thought I would start with 3 of the most commonly asked questions about this book. And one of the most asked questions is that me on the cover? And it absolutely is not me on the cover. I would never do that. It's actually my niece, Isabella, who's studying occupational therapy. All of my nieces and nephews and friends and family have been models throughout my entire career for different jobs. So just to clarify that, as a graphic designer, and I created this cover in starting with a photo of my niece and adding some palmettos, which are also iconic elements of South Louisiana. Wherever you see a palmetto, you know that there's water. That is actually my niece. And she's been a model for me for many things. That's how it started, the cover started.
That's awesome.
And the second most commonly asked question I receive is, am I Acadian? And unfortunately, I am not. I've grown to greatly love the Acadian people, the culture, but I'm a mutt, and I am French, but not Acadian. So.
And are you? I don't mean to interrupt you, Veni. Are you coming to us from Louisiana this evening?
Yes, I am coming to you from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, the state's capital, where I grew up. So people say, well, so the next, I guess, how did I get here? Am I Acadian? So I grew up in Baton Rouge, the land between what I say 2 great cultural areas. And our west is Acadiana, and our east of us is New Orleans. Very different cultures, very different histories. Most of my family is from New Orleans, so I grew up going to New Orleans and I'm very familiar with it and thought I knew the Acadian story, but as you'll learn, I really did not know the Acadian story, even though it was in my backyard. So people always ask me, because I'm not Acadian, I don't live in Acadia, I live in Baton Rouge. How did I get here? And this is also, I might mention, my very first book. My career has been varied, but I've never written an actual book. And so like recently I was at what we call a couchon de lait. And this just means a couchon de lait at the home of the Ancelet family. And Barry Ancelet is a very preeminent Acadian. Do people know what a couchon de lait is in Maine?
I don't know. I'm sure there are people in the audience that do, but for those like me that don't, please educate me.
Well, it is a traditional Acadian celebration surrounded by the cooking of a hog. And in this case, we happen to have a lot of feral hogs, which are an invasive species. And the Acadians are renowned, I'm sure you must know, for their cuisine.
Mhm.
They do a fantastic job. And so the hog, the pig, the couchon is really the center of a lot of culinary celebrations. So I'm at this couchon de lait and there's music playing and food that is just unbelievable. And talking to different people, and someone had heard about my book and they said, okay, you're a graphic designer, so how did you get here? And that always tickles me, because I kind of wonder myself, how did I come to write this book? And I guess it's like a journey. So anyway, as part of a graphic designer, you wear a lot of hats. You're expert for 5 seconds on 200 billion topics. I'm a very curious person, and I happen to love history, particularly regional South Louisiana history. Some background, I'm also, as a graphic designer, I think most graphic designers just love icons, symbols. That's what we deal with all of the time to communicate. So I worked at LSU, which is just full of some icons, everything from the architecture to the mascot. I grew up in a family business that made a soft drink that the very bottle is iconic in this area. We have iconic creatures like alligators that are applied to all manner of products and businesses and organizations. And our state bird is the pelican, which is symbolic all over the world for different reasons. To the left, if surely everyone remembers the great oil spill in the Gulf that consumed the world's attention. The pelican was sort of the iconic animal that represented the impact of animals from that spill. We also have an iconic animal that I did my thesis on, the Louisiana black bear. So I returned to grad school about a dozen years ago, and as part of my requirement for my degree, I had to take classes outside of my discipline. I looked in the history column and I saw the history of Acadiana, and I thought, oh, that'll be easy. I know that story. And that was pretty arrogant, I think, of me, or ignorant, one or the other. The teacher was Bill Arsenault, who you probably may not know if you're not familiar with Codafil, but he is a preeminent Acadian historian, writer, and teacher. So I had like the person for this class. And of course, I had no idea who he was, and I had no idea what Codafil was. And as you can see, it's the Council for the Development of French in Louisiana, which is a big deal, and it falls under the Louisiana Office of Cultural Development. As part of the requirements for the class, Bill gave us a list of books to choose from and to write a term paper. And one of the things I hate most in the world is term papers. I asked Bill if I could do something a little more creative, which falls into being a graphic designer. He was very amenable to the idea. I chose Evangeline, A Tale of Acadie by Longfellow, primarily because of her iconic stature in South Louisiana. That was my focus. So the result was a prototype of the book that I have now today. That was about a dozen years ago. Over the past several years, occasionally I would share this book with friends and family. And almost everyone said, "This is really interesting. I didn't know this. I live here in Louisiana and I don't know this. How come I don't know some little detail?" Or you help clarify some mystery about this story, which is it's kind of like the ultimate fact and fiction and lore and mystery all combined. And people believe different parts of the story with great passion. And it has Longfellow's story has served to reveal a unique ethnic group in a way that historians believe that had Longfellow not written his poem, the Acadian people that we know today would have continued in obscurity. I think that is like pretty powerful thing to know about. So I thought about this over the years to actually like make it formal. So I called up Bill Arsenault and asked him because I felt pretty intimidated to look at this culture and write this book, again, being an outsider. He encouraged me to do it. He was very supportive, and he's like, "I'm going to write the preface." So with his endorsement, I dove back into the subject matter, expanded it a bit, did more photography, more research, and actually published it. So that's kind of the background. This is my design I came up with since I self-published this, I came up with a name for my publishing company, which is Farfield Publishing, and created a logo. So that's what's before you. So that's how I got here. I could say that this book, they say that when a traveler takes a trip, sometimes the trip takes them. And that's quite true of this experience with writing this book. I looked at it as, again, a curious person trying to understand and unravel the lore and the myth and the story of Acadians in my backyard. But it has completely, I have, having done my own French immersion, so to speak, through getting the book out and going all through Acadiana into towns and communities that I had never experienced before. Along the way, meeting so many of the people, experiencing the music, the food, the architecture, the traditions, has been really a life changing experience for me. This is a lovely lady who works as a teacher in Acadiana, and this is at an Acadian festival in a little town called Abbeville down by the coast. And she's dressed in traditional Acadian attire. And I said, well, you shouldn't be wearing that smartwatch probably, but she was lovely. And again, I want to say that I am an outsider looking at this community and these traditions, and was a little, maybe a little uncomfortable in the process. These people were so warm and embracing and grateful to have the story looked at and the story told. So that was a gift, an unexpected gift. And they just took me into their arms and were like, well, you need to talk to so-and-so, and you need to go to this museum, and you need to go to this community. So it's really been an incredible experience. Our Louisiana's first state park is the Longfellow Evangeline Park. I think that's pretty significant. They focus on, of course, the history, but also the architecture, which is unique to the area. Everything is named after Evangeline in this area. You see it everywhere. It's on the bread. And this is actually a billboard for a very popular brand of bread that's only in Acadiana. And that loaf of bread actually turns. So it's pretty, yeah, it's pretty, quirky and amazing. And she is actually 175 years old, which is also incredible to me. For, if you go back in history, there are icons for every civilization and every community and culture. Well, in my humble opinion, Evangeline is the most impactful icon created by in North America, I would say, because of her effect on branding, excuse me, branding a ethnic group and helping them come from obscurity. And it's remarkable that this poet, Longfellow, who had never stepped foot in Louisiana and only had very minimal resources by which to write his poem, which, by the way, turned him into a rock star.
Yeah, this is like his first big hit is usually what I tell folks when they visit his childhood home. Evangeline's the first big one.
It was huge. I mean, they sold out within the first printing. It was transcribed into several languages. People were very moved by the story of the exile of Acadians. It was a brutal, sad time in history, and many people compare the event, which happened in the 1750s, to an ethnic cleansing that we might refer to today, because they didn't just kick them out. They sent them to all parts of the planet, wherever, just get on a ship and go this way and that way. And so in the process, families were divided. Many people died. They would show up in ports that the cities did not want them. It was they suffered greatly. And it's incredible that so much of their culture has not only survived, but thrived. This artwork is actually by an artist in Nova Scotia. I have never gone to Nova Scotia, and now everyone's like, you have to go. And I hope one day I can make that happen. I have been to Maine, and it's stunningly beautiful. But I have not gone to Nova Scotia. These are some of the, with Evangeline bread, how the interpretations of Evangeline and how they're applied commercially vary enormously. But you can see on the first one, she's more like a more peasant outfit, and then she gets modernized. One of the lores, there's lots of twists and turns to the story, but one of the lores was, or events, I should say, many people in South Louisiana believed that Evangeline was a real person, not just a character or representation of a person. And they believed that with great fervor. And one of the reasons was because a local fellow wrote the true history of Evangeline, and by way of bringing it back to Louisiana. So when Longfellow's poem came out, many people credit that poem with the tourism on the Northeast coast. The steamships took people with their copy of Longfellow's poem up the coast to go and see the land where Evangeline lived. And there was nothing there. There's nothing to see. There is now, and now it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. But at the time, you know, they were so taken with this poem and so moved by it. So the great majority of Acadians were invited by the Spanish to settle in South Louisiana. They suffered greatly. They were discriminated against. They weren't educated. They lived off the land, and they were discouraged to speak in their native language. In fact, they were penalized, and there were laws against speaking French in schools.
Yeah, that was the case in places in Maine too.
Oh, really? Okay. So this fella, Felix Borges, who was a kid around the time that Longfellow's poem came out, he was a very smart fellow. He was a lawyer, a leader, a politician, accomplished man, but he knew that his countrymen, his fellow Acadians, suffered greatly. And he kind of was like, well, they're all getting all this tourism and attention, and we're down here. And so I think that was, of course, I'm summarizing. He was also creative and a poet. So he wrote his own version. People down here loved it because it brought it to Louisiana. Part of that lore of his was that Evangeline waited under the tree in St. Martinville, and that her ashes were buried next to the church there. And everyone believed this. So Dolores Del Rio and her crew came and made one of, I guess, the most popular movie. It was during the silent film era. She too believed this, and everyone was very moved by the story. So she posed for the statue that is outside of the church that sits upon a tomb that supposedly contains the ashes of Evangeline. So I think there was a contingency from when this statue was dedicated. There was a contingency from Nova Scotia who came down, and they petitioned to move the ashes back to Nova Scotia. And of course, St. Martinville wasn't having any part of that. But I think it's kind of interesting that, I mean, there are many people who believe that there are ashes.
I mean, it's interesting, this idea of two different locations fighting over the ashes of a person who never existed. I mean, just like you said, how powerful that story and that imagery is for people.
Well, you can also connect with these people were Catholic, and Catholics are known for their holy relics.
Right.
In essence, she was a holy relic. So some generations look at her as a very holy, saintly type person. Other people look at her as a Joan of Arc that is strong and has persevered. Everyone has their different take on her. and it changes with the generations. Some people have asked me or suggested, is she even relevant?
Mm.
And I think that's a good question to ask. Again, as an outsider, I think she's completely relevant in whatever way you see her as, for the value of representing the Acadians, who not only, like, I think am repeating myself, but not only survived a horrific history, but have thrived. And I think, like, particularly the state of Louisiana owes so much to Evangeline and so much to Longfellow for the culture that we have today, which is now worldwide. She's everywhere. This is a little museum where someone's done an embroidery of her. This is based on a very famous painting, one of the first. In the book, I really focus on the images of Evangeline, and because it's important to note that Longfellow's original book did not have any images in it. But it was a time, an era where books that had money behind them could hire the best illustrators. So it was a creative that decided what she looked like, which I thought, being a creative myself, like, well, what is her attire? Well, her attire then became iconic. The sabots, the wooden shoes, the cape, the peasant, the very working class outfit. This woman is an Acadian and an advocate for the preservation of the culture. And she, as a child, was forbidden to speak French in school, or they'd only speak it at home amongst the family. And she and many others in the community are very active, I should say, in speaking the language, teaching the language, and sharing the culture. This, to me, again, I love history. History does not survive by just being in a book. And this is what I've learned, I think, through this experience of being around Acadians and the culture, is they live it. They live it through their music, through their dance, through their song, through their cuisine, through their architecture. And really, they're just joie de vivre. They have so much joy and so much energy and positive connection to and welcoming to people like me. It's just, it's very catching. It's very attractive. This is a gentleman whose great ancestor wove this bedspread. It's made out of brown cotton. And that particular technique and that particular cotton is now being preserved, and people are learning to make things out of it. Again, another Acadian cultural thing. And I met tons of people who were named Gabrielle or Evangeline, and this little girl's name was Evangeline. So people are still naming their children after Longfellow's characters. I found it interesting that they don't really talk about Longfellow as much as I would think. I know, to me, I always want to know about the creators. And so I spent quite a bit of time myself just wondering, who was this man who created such a powerful, iconic figure that was so transformative. So I did commit a good bit to trying to understand him. And someone asked me recently, like, what do you think of him? And I think he was an incredibly empathetic, kind man who really believed in his craft, and of course wanted to write something powerful. I don't think he ever expected this poem to have the results that it did. But he was very gracious about it and went on, of course, to create so much more. And but I think he must have been a very kind person to have heard the story, bits of it, and then retold it in such a powerful way. I think I just think we have a lot to be thankful for him in Louisiana and perhaps elsewhere, but I'd be happy to answer any questions
Yeah,
about.
that was great. And we are getting a couple questions from the audience. Someone is saying that they visited the Grand Pré National Historical Site and came away with a really strong appreciation of Maine Acadian people. Do you talk at all about Maine Acadians in the book?
I do not.
No.
In fact, down here, there is a little bit of a talk about, well, Longfellow really didn't tell the whole story, because a lot of people in the Boston and Philadelphia and Maine were unfair to the Acadians.
Mhm.
And he didn't address the politics of his own community.
Yeah.
And to that I say, as does his biographer, that he was a poet, not a historian.
Right. Right.
It was his job to tell creatively the story. That was his job. I
Mhm.
don't think he really got into the politics.
No,
So
I think that that's accurate. And it was interesting when you were saying earlier how you kind of approach this as an outsider. I mean, so did Henry in a different way. I don't think, I think if he were alive today, he probably would have said, oh, I need to I need to talk to Acadian people and learn more about their culture. I don't think that was a societal expectation back then the same way that it is today. But he came to it as an outsider also.
true.
Someone else is asking, did you come across works other than Longfellow and Voorhees about the Acadian expulsion while you were writing the book?
Oh, there's a ton of work out there. Ton of work. I mentioned a few of them in the biography of the book, but there is a ton. Another reason to be intimidated is there's quite a bit of scholarship on the subject.
Mhm.
I focused on the imagery in the book, as well as the story. So yes, and we're quite passionate in. There was a historian that felt like other parts of Nova Scotia were not well represented. That Grand Pré was only one community. Yeah, so there's the whole political side of it. How it wasn't. Longfellow's poem was forbidden to be read back in the day, and
Mhm.
then it was required reading by everyone
Mhm.
in all classrooms. I'm very sad when I hear that people don't know who she is, and
Mhm.
I do come across that. There's
Yeah.
an incredible mural in the book during the public works effort during the Depression. And so this is in the St. Martinville post office. And I went looking for this work because at one time it was misplaced. And I finally found it in this little indescript post office. And I was so excited. And it had a big giant Christmas tree in front of it. It was quite huge and beautiful. And I was sort of excited. And I asked the little lady at the counter, I'm like, wow, I've been looking for this. And do you know what this is? And she's like, no.
I know the mural. Yes.
And I was like, it's unprotected. I'm like, let
Yeah.
me see, plastic in front of it or glass. People could come up and damage it. But she did allow me to remove the tree remove the tree so that I could take a photograph of this beautiful mural.
Someone else is asking, wasn't it Nathaniel Hawthorne who suggested the idea to Longfellow? That's my understanding, is that he had this, he's like, oh, like, I don't know if he's, I've got this idea for a story, like a man and a woman, they're separated on their wedding day, and it, against the backdrop of the Acadians, but he just wasn't doing anything with it, and Longfellow asked, if you're not going to do anything with it, I think I could make something out of that. And so Hawthorne said, sure, go ahead.
But they were, Hawthorne and Longfellow were boyhood best buddies from early days. And apparently, we weren't there, but apparently the story I kind of settled on is that they were all at dinner, and there was a pastor that passed along the story to both gentlemen. Hawthorne said he wasn't going to pick it up,
right?
And Longfellow was captivated by the story. So I think it was funny too. I put in the book that Hawthorne made a joke and said, no wonder Evangeline was always running away from him, because she wasn't a very attractive woman.
I thought that was funny too. Gabriel, yeah, based on some of the illustrations.
Gabrielle was always eluding her because she was unattractive. So I think the two men were very close their entire lives.
Oh yeah. Henry and Hawthorne, they were both in college together. Their lives intersected quite a bit. Not so much a question, but a comment from someone in the audience. They'd love to see an update of your book after you visit Nova Scotia.
Well, that's so interesting that you say that, because having gone around, as I mentioned, in my backyard, of all these towns, and met all these people. One person, several people have said, well, you forgot this, and you don't have this in your book, and there's an Evangeline statue in Ville Plot that you did not include. And
there's so much,
I'm like, oh wow. And then there's another, when I go to share my book in that area, when some people are like, Evangeline Reconsidered. Exactly what are you reconsidering? They're defensive about their world. So, but everybody, all the Acadian people are saying, well, when are you coming out with the second version that addresses all of the other missing information?
Well, in Maine, this is not our first program that touches on Acadian history. And in my experience, whenever we've done a program on this topic, it's hugely popular in Maine. It's still a community that, I've had a very similar experience with, that they're just, folks are very warm, that, very proud to be Acadian. And they love to talk about it with other people. And so for those of you in the audience that haven't seen our prior content, last year we did for Longfellow's birthday, which is on the anniversary of his birth is on Monday, the 27th. Last year for his birthday, we got together and talked about his poems inspired by historical events, including Evangeline. We hosted a couple of years ago a talk about not the poem, but about the actual, Acadian history and the expulsion out of North America. We also did one of my favorite programs that we've done. We had Robert Sylvain, whose grandmother was Acadian, and he's a musician. He took her notebook and has kind of translated a lot of her songs. He performed for us. He pulled his daughter in at one point. This was still early in the pandemic, and Zoom was still very new. But they sang for us, and he played the guitar, and it was wonderful. So if you visit the Maine Historical Society, our YouTube channel, you can see all those recordings. If you visit Maine Memory Network, our online database, you can see a lot of historical records, items, images related to this topic, whether it's Longfellow and his poem or Acadian history. And of course, don't forget, to get your copy of the book. You can buy it online or visit MHS in person at our at 489 Congress Street in Portland. And yeah, and visit Henry's home there too. Someone's reminding me in the chat, of course, his childhood home will be open again to the public in June. And his his home in Cambridge, Massachusetts too. I imagine will be opening soon this spring. So thank you so much, Veni, for joining us this evening and sharing your experience with this story and some information about your book. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we close?
I would just want to say thank you, and also how much Maine, I think, influenced Henry's book, how he incorporated nature, which is so important to us down here in Louisiana, into the poem, which I thought added to it. So,
Yeah,
and
I
have visited Maine, it's incredibly beautiful.
Well, thank you again. And thank you to everyone in the audience for joining us. Hope we'll see you folks back here real soon.